My name is Tom Martin. I'll be your host today. Our teleconference today is Law Firm Cybersecurity, and if you read through the book by the same name by Daniel Gary and Bill Sparrow, you'll be scratching your head and wondering exactly what steps to take in your solo and small firm. We're here today to break down some of those concepts in that book into actionable steps so you can take those steps to secure your practice. Our sponsor today is GLSA, and for those non-members who may be dropping in on the call today, GLSA, or Group Legal Services Association, is a professional membership organization representing the legal services plan industry and provider attorneys. And joining GLSA is just a good way for solos and small firms to increase their business. Check us out at glsaonline.org. And so we're very lucky today to have today's guest, Steven Zetzer. He is going to help us break down that law firm cybersecurity book into actionable steps to implement in your firm. Steven is a founder and principal owner of eWranglers, LLC. Steven founded eWranglers in January of 2000 as a firm focused on the information security for small business. And his customers quickly found out that secure systems were also reliable systems, and the firm has grown to provide quality IT services to clients in Montana and Colorado and across the country. Steven is also a graduate of the Indiana University Kelley School of Business, and he holds the Certified Information Systems Security Professional Credential, and that was quite a mouthful. So, Steven, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. How are you doing today?
Thanks, Thomas. I appreciate the introduction, and I'm doing fantastic today. It's really an honor to be here, and I love sharing knowledge about this topic, so I appreciate the opportunity.
And earlier you're saying that it's been, I think, record-breaking heat in Denver.
Yeah, right? yeah. So it's another, I think it's about our 45th day above 90 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm hoping it'll be one of the last for the summer. We'll see at this point.
Yeah, and it's an interesting business. Law firm cybersecurity, it's one that I think is really important. I think lawyers all would agree that the security of information, including client information, is critical. It's one of the things that we have an oath to protect, and at the same time, it's sometimes overlooked.
Yeah, that's correct, and I'll say the biggest reason is that it's really difficult for people to understand all of the actionable items that they can do in the course of their workday to actually protect information, or on the flip side, really all of the things that they do in their workday and the way that they do them that risks really spilling data and risks exposure, and it's just not apparent in the course of how people are working.
So, what got you interested in this? Like, of all the different things that you could do in information technology, what got you interested in cybersecurity?
Yeah, it's just interesting. That dates back to my time at the Indiana University Kelley School of Business. I was an accounting and finance major at the time, and I did an internship, and I was asked to write a paper on any topic, kind of as a summary to get credit for my internship that I did. And the topic I chose back in the 1980s vintage cybersecurity space was related to cybersecurity, and I really broke down a particular breach at the Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York that occurred back in the 1980s, and I was just fascinated with the topic. And I began my career in accounting and finance, but quickly moved over to IT. And by 2000, I became one of the earlier certified information systems security professionals with ISC Squared, and I've been working in security ever since.
So, for people that are listening in on the podcast today, what is a good working definition of cybersecurity?
I would say it is really the practice of addressing the confidentiality integrity and availability of data really in any form. And that may be an oversimplification, but when you just consider those three words, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, that really does encompass the whole field.
And before we started the podcast, you'd given me some notes about this book by Daniel Gary and Bill Sparrow called Law Firm Cybersecurity. When did that come out?
I believe the book was published in 2017. I don't have it in front of me, but it was published by the ABA, and it has been featured at some of the ABA conferences, and I think you will find it for sale at the upcoming GP Solo conference this fall. So it is fairly recent.
So law firm cybersecurity is something that comes up, pretty often in terms of blog posts and news coverage that lawyers see about what they should be watching out for. How did we get here? Why is this an issue that lawyers should be aware of?
Well, first of all, it's always been an issue, right? And so the sensitivity of data that clients entrust to their counsel is significant and has always been significant. And if you just go back to the days really when records were stored on paper, it was really second nature that firms stored paper documents in locked file cabinets, and there may have been only a handful of people in the firm who had keys to those files. And it was much easier to maintain the confidentiality of data. There might be a traditional phone call, or perhaps a fax, but ultimately all of the data was stored on paper, and it was sitting in usually a locked file cabinet, or perhaps in a locked drawer on an attorney's desk. So really what's happened over the last 20 years in earnest is that the proliferation of devices and ways to access and store information has exploded. So now when you used to have potentially all of the data about a case or a client sitting in one file drawer in one physical office, now you potentially have copies of all or part of this particular case on mobile phones, on tablet PCs, on home computers, in email accounts, and not only within the firm itself, but also within other organizations that you've communicated with. So the landscape has changed completely in that you really have to understand where the data is stored to be able to protect it. And I think a lot of people just don't see this or don't perceive this in their head that, oh, this particular file now has 10 copies that could potentially be in all these different places, and what would be the implications of trying to contain that. So we've really just gotten into a situation which I would call, for most firms, complete chaos.
Wow. So where we stand today is not good.
Right.
So okay, so back to this book. It's I think you would probably say it's a pretty good guide, right, to how to get it right.
Yes. Yeah. I think in terms, or in the classification of books on cybersecurity, and not just law firm cybersecurity, but any cybersecurity, a lot of the books tend to be very thick. And one of the nice things about this book is it's not very thick, and it is somewhat consumable by someone who is non-technical. Even saying that, though, it still needs a little bit of interpretation. I think it does a really good job of putting in perspective the duty of care that an attorney has in protecting the information, and there really is, it's really kind of defining where that line is on what are reasonable measures that should be taken in a firm. And I really like to look at this in terms of going to what it feels like and what it looks like after there's been a breach. And people start asking questions. And the questions they ask are, well, why wasn't this device tracked, or why weren't these files encrypted, or what were those files doing on this device in the first place?
Mhm.
So when you start asking those questions, it's a lot easier to go back and think of, okay, this is really how I should be handling this particular file.
The concepts in the book, how can we easily translate those into actions that we should take to try to prevent any type of breach like the one you were just talking about?
Well, I think one of the most important parts of the book is in chapter 2. The authors speak of the 10 commandments of cybersecurity, and it talks about this concept of develop and practice strong cyber hygiene. And
Cyber hygiene.
yeah, yeah, it's an interesting concept, and it will, the definition of that will really come to understanding as we work through the podcast here. But it really comes down to looking at all of the aspects of how data is created and stored in and communicated within your firm. And I like to get really down into three categories of specifics around people, process, and technology measures. And a lot of times when you talk to tech people, they will overemphasize the technology solution, and it's great. Just buy our software and your office will be secure. Install our antivirus on all your Macs and PCs, and you're done. Uh, and,
Right.
and really, it's much wider than that. And I will say that uh, upwards of 40% of the risks really comes from people. And I look at people and their processes, and then the technology that goes with that. So what all of those do compose what becomes your effective cyber hygiene. And that's really the end result of how clean your operation is in the context of, hey, what is the policy of how do we do things in our firm? And and I will say that that's really one of the first things to address is keep it simple and really decide what is okay in your firm, because barring specifics on what they're allowed to do, the employees and partners who work in a firm are going to get through the workday, and they're going to get their job done, and they're going to do it in the best way that they know how, or in the best way that they're able to do that. And by putting really a fence around what is okay on what people are allowed to do and how people are to do things, that is really the first step in getting this right. And I really like to emphasize that this does not have to be complicated, right? We're talking about solo and small firms, and I like to keep this document under 3 pages. And the document says things like, hey, in our firm, we store all case documents in this particular shared file structure in our office. So, uh, are you following me here?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It sounds like this 3-page document that you're talking about, it would outline the different aspects of people, process, and technology measures. Is that right? Or would it focus just on one or two?
Yeah. It's really going to outline just how you do things in your firm, and
Okay.
I'll cover some areas that specifically you want to address in this 3-page policy. Number one is you want to address devices. What devices are permitted to be used in the firm? Can you use for example, can an employee or partner use their personal cell phone to conduct any firm business? Or must they use a cell phone that is issued by the firm? So that's just a decision point, right? So there's a lot of implications of that initial decision.
Hmm.
And the firm definitely has a lot more control if they issue a mobile device to the employee and say, use this device when conducting any firm business. Do not use your personal cell phone under any circumstances. Now, right, we're talking about small firms. And,
Right.
it might be easy in the tech world to get the nerds to carry 2 cell phones, but, for a practicing attorney to carry 2 cell phones, I think you're going to get a lot of pushback.
Right.
And and so when you're considering that decision, it's fine to say that personal cell phones can be used in the firm business, but to put some boundaries on how the personal cell phones can be used and how they're tracked. And, again, I'm talking about keeping it simple, or like this is one paragraph on the 3-page document that says, okay, if you're using your personal cell phone in conducting business for the firm, then the cell phone needs to be registered in a tracking system that is tied into the email. Usually the email will have this functionality built in. So if you're using something like Office 365 or Google G Suite for Business, there is going to be a mobile device registration and tracking that's going to be built into when that device is connected into the firm's email system. So the protection that this gives you is that, number one, the device is registered and logged. So you're going to know every single device down by serial number, carrier, mobile number, all that potentially could contain files that are related to the firm. And those platforms will also give the ability that if that device falls out of the control of somebody in the firm, it's lost or stolen, then a self-destruct command can be sent to that device to delete any data, or to at least lock the device so that anybody who comes in possession of it is not able to steal information from it. So that when you think about it, it's very simple to say that up front, and it's not really that hard to actually do it, but to have the forethought to um, uh, do that ahead of time, that's what really makes the difference between being successful and not with some of these concepts in the book.
Okay, so firms should be encouraged to put together a cybersecurity policy document, and that one of the things in this document that you would touch on would be mobile devices, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And that the upside of having, I guess, law firm controlled mobile devices is that you could track what happens, and you could also control the data. So if it falls into the wrong hands, you can delete it.
Yep, that's exactly right. And so you can then build on that. So obviously, people in the firm do not only work on mobile devices; they also work on Macs. They also work on PCs. They may
Mhm.
also work from the office, and they may also work from home. So you've got to build on that policy and then define which types of PCs or which PCs or Macs are able to be used for doing work in the firm. Like, can employees work from home? So a lot of, say you've got a cloud-based practice management system, and all it requires is that you sign in through a web browser. So then employees might quickly assume, oh, well, I can just sign in from home and work on this case. Well, you really want to specify that up front, that if that's permitted in your firm, if any employees are permitted to log in to the practice management system from home, for example, uh, how are they able, or how are they expected to work? Are they allowed to download and temporarily work with a document, for example, and then re-upload it back into the practice management system? And then what happens is, does that document then become cached on that user's personal home computer? So just putting some expectations on, hey, if you do this, these are the risks, and these are the things that you are to be mindful of, and this is what you are to not do. If, for example, you download a document while you're working on it, then the procedure is to delete it and then to empty your recycle bin or empty your trash bin after you're concluding that particular work session. So again, just being mindful up front and thinking about where data might be potentially spilling to, and then sweeping it up when the work is done as a matter of process.
When I hear you talking about that, it's just it occurs to me that there's so many points of failure, potential failure. There's, especially when you when you're using the example about if you're using your home computer and there's cached copies of documents, and it seems that even with the best of intentions and practices, that there could be some digital residue or files left over. Um, how
Data
do you
leakage.
yeah, how do you deal with that? I mean, I guess it's a question of nothing's perfect, and there's a certain amount of risk that people take on by doing that, right?
Well, and this is where taking the time to compose this document, the next step, obviously, after the document is composed, is doing a training session with everyone who works in the firm and making sure everyone understands that, hey, these things will happen in the course of your work, and this is how to avoid making it a risk for the firm. This is allowing you to be productive, allowing you to work from home, allowing you to work from all these devices. These are the risks of potentially leaking data that's very confidential data about our clients in the course of this work. These are the steps that you have to take to avoid those risks. And these are not burdensome, right? So I really like the school of thought when it comes to cybersecurity, that security is really about enabling productivity. And a lot of people will see security as a barrier and something that stands in the way of getting things done. Oh my God, I have another password to remember. It's just, it gets kind of overwhelming. And if as soon as security is perceived that way, then people will not do it. They will find ways to work around it. They'll circumvent it. But if they see ways that they can actually be productive and get their job done in the context of a process that isn't going to leak data, then people are more successful with it.
Well, I definitely agree with that. You had mentioned that people is they're part of this. People, process, technology measures, and people. Um, it's difficult for us to remain consistent on security measures sometimes. But
Oh
we,
yeah, for sure.
yeah. So in terms of the cybersecurity policy document, we talked about devices, desktops. Um, what about passwords? How do we deal with those?
Yeah, so obviously, anyone who is even at the most basic level of using computers or IT to get their job done is going to have to deal with lots of different passwords. And passwords in themselves are inherently not secure. So uh, uh, basically, a very common way to break passwords is to guess them. And it's not a human who's doing the guessing; it's a computer. So you can imagine a computer can guess, thousands or millions of possible password combinations in a matter of seconds. So the best passwords are randomly generated. And going back to that policy document, uh, you know, this is one where you may see some pushback, but the best practice really with passwords is that every system that you sign into has a unique password that is randomly generated. And the way that you make users productive with something like this is they use a password management program. And again, going back to that policy document, the simple lines that you say in there are, hey, every system that you sign into is to have a unique password that is randomly generated by the password management program that we give you. Now circle back to of the people process technology. Now you've got a technology measure that goes to support that policy and process and training that you've put in place. And you say, okay, this is how we're going to enable you to be successful in using those unique randomly generated passwords. We're going to give you this password management tool as part of your toolbox in working in this firm. And we're going to show you some tips and tricks on how to use this product successfully in the course of your work.
And you know what? I could speak to those password managers myself. I've jumped on that bandwagon and I'm using it to manage my passwords. It's actually really convenient and comes up with some pretty crazy strong passwords to use for each of the different apps that I use online.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. I will say that even as a techie person, they are difficult to get over the hump of using. And again, once the firm specifies that, hey, this is the way we do it in our firm, and yes, we're going to have some hurdles getting this implemented, but in the direction of the firm, client security is paramount. This is one of the tools that we have. This is how we're going to do it in our firm. If you have questions, we've hired some outside tech support to help in the use of this product. I particularly like LastPass Enterprise is a good one in partly because you can in the context of a small firm that has even 2 or 3 or 4 employees, you can manage the user accounts and the password vaults and actually revoke revoke access to an employee who leaves, for example, or employees could share some particular passwords. Again, I advise that you have unique passwords for every user, but there are those cases where there may be a particular site that doesn't support having multiple users in the firm, or it's just not practical to have, on the ground to be maintaining a user account database on something that's logged into once a month or once every quarter. So there might be one particular account for the firm that people who need to access that site might share.
I hadn't even thought about that option, which is that, as you pointed out with the password management system, if somebody leaves, you could basically globally revoke their access to apps instead of having to try to remember, okay, what apps do they have access to, and turning them off individually.
Right. And if you think about it, something like LastPass, you have the ability to access the password vault on a PC, on a Mac, or on a mobile device. And so let's say it's an employee who's left, and in the firm's policy, they do permit use of a personal mobile device for firm business. There could be a copy of that password vault sitting on that user's mobile device. And if you're using like LastPass Enterprise, you can administratively revoke or disable ability to access that password vault. So even though the user has a copy remaining on their cell phone when they leave the firm, it's useless. They're not able to access it because you've basically turned it off.
Well, this is really great stuff, Stephen. So we kind of talked about the cybersecurity policy document. Devices, desktops, passwords are amongst some of the things to include in it. So let's say, I'm the law firm managing partner, I have this policy. What do I do with it at that point?
Well, so once you've agreed by yourself or among your partners on the policy, you want to number one, make sure that the technology in your firm matches the policy, and that people are able to comply with the policy with the technology and tools that they have. So this is where you're shopping and buying your technology from your vendors. You want to make sure that it dovetails in with what you've said is permitted in your firm. And once that is in place, you want to do one or more training sessions with your staff where, and I like to do these, I like to limit it to 1 hour and to basically just bring up the document and work through paragraph by paragraph of the document, explain, how this impacts your workflow and, what you can and can't do. And these are the tools, and this is where you get help. And I also like to record the session. So when we do these with our clients, we do them over a web meeting, and we just work through the document. We record the session, and we post it in a password protected online file, and that way employees can go back and watch it again, or if a new employee comes on, they can watch that before they start working. And so everybody's on the same page when it comes to that. So that training session is key.
So what else should we cover in training?
Well, I would say we haven't gone into two-factor authentication.
Oh,
And so we talked about passwords, right?
yeah.
And so I think everybody's familiar with the stories about the 2016 US elections. One of the key ways that the information was hacked was people were signed in to the email accounts of very important people who were making a lot of decisions throughout the course of the campaign. And if you imagine, somebody being logged into your personal email account on their cell phone and basically just watching all of the email activity and reading and deciding what to release or what might be damaging, that's huge. And this one simple technology of two-factor authentication would have prevented those hacks from happening. And so, Google G
So
Suite, even free Google accounts will allow you to enable two-factor authentication. And what that is in order to sign in to your email box, you have to have your username and your password, and then usually a text message will be sent to your cell phone with a one-time code to complete the login. And, so from your perspective of protecting yourself, if you get one of those codes on your phone and you are not actively trying to log into your email box from one of your devices, right off the bat that somebody has your password and they've attempted to sign on to your account. So, if that one thing was done, that would have prevented those hacks from happening.
okay, so the two factors, one factor is your login credentials that you normally use. And then the second factor is just some other, does it have to be a device or?
It's the one that I found users are most successful in using as a text message, because I think 98% of people can handle receiving a text message and reading it. So I like that one. There's lots of different ways to do it, but I like to start simple, and a text message works great. So in Google, for example, if you just click on your in the upper right of your Gmail window, you just click on the little circle that is your name, and then you go to your account settings and then security. It's right there to enable two-factor, and it'll say, how do you want to do it? Do you want to receive text messages? Okay, what's the mobile number? Let's validate the mobile number, and it sends a one-time code to activate it. And then from that point forward, any future login to Google is going to be protected by two-factor. And now this isn't annoying for the user because they're not going to be prompted on devices where they've already signed in. So their particular, their Chrome browser on their Mac, that's going to automatically sign in, and it's not going to prompt them every time. So it's only when a new device connects which would be the case if somebody was trying to hack the account.
So, is it possible to operate any firm without any cybersecurity risk?
No. Bottom line, there's always going to be some cybersecurity risk. And the way I look at risk is on a spectrum, from 0 to 100%. And every defensive measure that you put into place is going to reduce your risk by some measurable percentage. So just developing the policy reduces your risk by, because you've got that awareness going. Once you implement the technology that goes with that policy, you potentially reduce your risk by another percentage point. And then once you've trained your employees and they're actually using the steps involved, I'll say that if you've done all this stuff right that we've talked about, you've really addressed about 80% of the cybersecurity risk in your firm. So that residual percent, you can keep attacking it, but it's going to be exponentially more complicated and more expensive to start nitpicking those remaining pieces that represents really that last 20% of residual risk. And this is where the insurance industry has really stepped up, and there are a lot of cyber liability policies that will specifically address. And the important consideration is here, as people might think these types of events are covered under their malpractice or under their commercial liability. And specifically, those policies typically will exclude this type of event. So it's important to understand that, if you get to that point where you're ready to buy insurance, that the policies that you currently have are not likely going to cover a cyber event.
That pesky last 20%, it always seems to be the case uh, across the board with a lot of different things. So don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right?
Yes, right. Done is better than perfect is what I like to say.
So one thing I just want to circle back to, because it just intrigued me when you said it, is cyber hygiene. So how does that play into this?
So now that you've defined in your policy where things are to go, what devices are permitted, you want to have the ability to know that everything is in its place, that that things are clean and in order. Some other aspects of cyber hygiene, which are basic things, are things like software patches and updates. When you have devices that fall behind, the vendors are constantly issuing updates for Microsoft Office, for Microsoft Windows, for the Mac OS, for the iOS on your phone, for your Android OS, app updates, all that kind of stuff. They can be annoying for people because their devices are constantly prompting them, do you want to update? No, leave me alone, I want to
Yep.
work. So users need to know that those types of patches and updates are very important. And from an IT perspective, you really want to have a handle on that inventory of devices that are being used in your firm. So those management consoles, for example, for Google G Suite or Office 365, where all the devices that have connected in, all of the PCs and Macs that are used in your firm or connected to from home, you want to know that all those devices are current, up to date, that they're running some kind of antivirus, anti-malware. And this is not rocket science, right? A lot of any competent IT managed service provider can register your devices and be able to run a report at any given time and tell you the current status of whether they're up to date, whether they're being used, all that type of stuff. So it's not that hard, but you want at any given point in time to know that every device that's being used in your firm is on a list somewhere, and you know for sure that that device is protected and that it's current and up to date.
All right, so we have talked about the broad strokes about how to keep a law firm more secure, creating a policy document, detailing how we're going to deal with devices, mobile devices, desktops, passwords, two-factor authentication, and implementing the cyber hygiene to keep that all up to date. I think this is really invaluable information. Where can people follow up to learn more about this?
Of course, you can check out my website. That's ewranglersbts.com. That's EWRANGLERSBTS.com. You can check out my LinkedIn profile. It's just Steven Zetzer, StephenZetzer. You can follow my Twitter at Steve Zetzer with a STEVE. Or you're welcome to call my office, 888-908-4551.
Thank you so much, Stephen. I honestly learned a lot about law firm cybersecurity stuff that some of which I really didn't know before, and understanding how it works and how to keep, my firm, any of the people listening, their firms safe and their client information safe. It's really, really great information. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Thomas. It's been an honor to join you today.
All right. I want to thank Stephen again for sharing his time and thoughts. Thank you all for attending our teleconference, Law Firm Cybersecurity with Stephen Zetzer. Again, this is Tom Martin. Thank you to GLSA for sponsoring. Remember, joining GLSA is just a good way for solos and small firms to increase their business. And you can check us out at glsaonline.org. Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you.
All right. See you all next month. Bye.